All right, everybody. So today on the podcast, we have Natural Hypertrophy. How you doing, man?
Good. How are you today?
I'm good. So, a lot of people have recommended that I get you on the podcast. And sometimes it's just, either not being able to find somebody or have access. And sometimes it's just, things get busy. I know you've been on the YouTube scene for a while and you got pretty good following. And I noticed something with guys like you or Jeffrey Verity Schofield or like Alpha Destiny. It's like a very loyal following, like consistently people would be in my comment section, get this person on the podcast. And like, it's a lot of the same people. So I guess for people who are not familiar with you, maybe you can give a little bit of background, how long you've been lifting, how long you've been in the YouTube space, all of that.
All right. So I've been lifting for close to 13 years now. It's been a long journey. I started when I was 15. And just like with many people, without YouTube Fitness, back when it didn't exist, I did my own thing for a very long time. And so I built a lot of experience before I was allowed to actually tap into other people's. And it's the reason why I also wanted to start a channel, is because when I saw how much I progressed off of YouTube Fitness and the information that others gave me for free, I knew I had to give back somehow. So that's when I started the channel, which was roughly 2 years ago. But I've been on YouTube Fitness since 2009. I've always been there. So it was for me an interesting thing to start to join a movement that I've always looked at from afar, and now being able to actually be part of it and have an influence on it.
That's awesome. Yeah. So kind of similar story with me. I started lifting around 13, 14 years old. I've been watching YouTube Fitness since also probably 2009 or so. And my channel is now 3 years old, pretty much mostly just podcasts. I do some solo videos, but it's mostly the podcast stuff. But yeah, it is interesting, like seeing guys like, I don't know if you know 3D Muscle Journey and other guys that I had watched for years that now, I'm on like a very conversational basis with, and it's kind of interesting now being in that world.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm sure that a lot of people watching this right now feel the same way, where they are not sure yet. They have a good level. They want to share things with people, but they think that it's this unbreakable wall. And at the end of the day, they need to understand that it's not. Like Geoff, you, me, we all decided to start making videos one day, and there we are. There's space for everyone to share their beliefs and knowledge.
Yeah. Did you have any connections? Like, I know for me, one of the reasons of the podcast, not that, my podcast is huge, but usually, episodes get 2,000 views, like a number that I'm happy with. Like some people like seeing it, the community is seeing it. And part of that was because I had some connections early on. So when you started, did you have any connections to people that you knew, or was it just you just started making videos and then the algorithm kind of picked it up?
I started just right off the bat by myself. But I did have a strategy and a game plan when I started, because I knew that YouTube Fitness especially is ruthless, meaning that there's no space for you. The algorithm has no time for your small channel. It's never going to recommend it. So what I did is, and maybe a lot of people in the comments are going to remember that, I used to post comments everywhere, meaning that I was subscribed to like 300 channels, and every time someone would post a video, I would post a comment. Hundreds of comments every single day. And that's how I actually built the channel, because out of each 100 people that looked at my comment and liked it, one would click on the name, being intrigued, look at one video and maybe subscribed. And that's how I actually got started. None of my videos ever got popular. It's just that I built a base community just with witty comments.
There's a guy who I think his name is Back Guy, and I've seen him all over the place. And that's kind of how it was with him. He had these top comments all the time. And I think he's got a couple 100,000 followers now or subscribers now, I think. But some of his videos have done very well, and they're just kind of these like humorous videos and whatnot. But yeah, I've seen that. And for a while, I would have notifications on when I first got started. And so I could be like a top comment. I've kind of backed off from that now, but it's not because I don't think it's a good strategy. I think it is. I just, I have other things going on, but I think that's interesting that you went about it that way.
Yeah, it also needs to be something that you like doing, meaning that I love writing. I love writing on the spot and having to be really quick, because as you know, if you want the top comment, you have to be really quick.
Right.
And on top of that, most of what I did was just usually sarcasm or jokes, which always makes it better, because I get people to have a quick laugh. And out of that, I still get subscribers.
Right. Now, I know Jeff at this point, Jeffrey Verity Schofield, he's pretty much full-time fitness, I believe. I think so. It's Alpha Destiny. I mean, most of the people we know are. Is that how it is for you, or do you still have like a full-time job elsewhere and then you do this on the side?
YouTube for me is just a hobby. It's just something that I do minimally on a weekly basis, meaning that my job takes me most of my time, then it's my training, then it's my family, and whatever hours I can scrap by for YouTube, I use.
Okay. Yeah. And that's, I think, even more shows the success you've had, because for a lot of people, like I saw, I imagine Jeff will watch this. And I think one thing I disagreed with him on is I saw a comment where he said, it's really not that hard, to succeed in the fitness industry. And I think that's really not true. I mean, from a percentage standpoint, 99% of channels will never be seen, will never be watched. Like, this really is an area where you have to do, like, I don't know what you do for your job, but like with my profession, even if you're 50th percentile, you're still doing pretty well in life, right? But I mean, fitness, you got to be top 1 percentile to actually make this like your career and make a living off of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that Geoff might have a little bit of a survivor bias going on, because it's true that once you quote unquote make it and you're out of the swamp, you scarcely turn around to look at all of the small channels that never make it. I still do it because these guys are in my comments and they're part of the community. So I talk with them. I look at their channels. They have 100 subscribers. In a year, they'll have 180. They most likely won't go anywhere. Why? Because there's only a very finite amount of people who make it. And it's not necessarily because they're the best channels or have the most talent. Sometimes it's just down to luck. Well, one of your videos got recommended, it created a momentum, and you built a channel off of that. It's important to remember that for us, because we have this platform and this audience, yes, because of our work, but also because at some point we got lucky. There was a spark at some point and we just took it from there. And as you said, for anyone who wants to make it big or make a living in the fitness sphere, you have to understand that it would be so much easier to pick a trade and get really good at that and make 10 times as much money at your trade. Fitness is cutthroat, and fitness is a place where there's scarcely any money left and people fight for it.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely something like people have asked me, would you ever want to make it your full time? And even if I actually could make the same amount of money, I wouldn't have the desire for it to be my entire life. But I also do not have the hubris to think that I could do that. That would be very tough to do. But you're right, the luck aspect. I mean, there are people like when I look at like Greg Doucette, his channel growth is not surprising to me. I know some people say, how do people follow this guy? And it's like, yeah, maybe you could make memes about him, but the fact that what he is doing, you have somebody with, a physique and powerlifting background to back it up, who had all these call out videos and natty or not and topics of the day and all these things, and an excessive amount of volume of videos, that's not surprising. But every once in a while, I'll see a channel where there's this, I won't say his name, but there's a calisthenics channel that the guy's just like a nice guy, but he's soft spoken. His videos are not engaging. And somehow the algorithm picked this guy up and he has like a couple million subscribers. And his videos are on par with others I've seen where the person has 100 subscribers. And sometimes it really is just this random luck, I guess.
Yeah. It's always important to take into account fate, right? Because I'm the type of person that will always tell you that I'm responsible for everything. And I like to believe that, but the algorithm is set up, as someone who works with algorithms, I can tell you that, is set up in a way that's fairly random, meaning that you will have videos sometimes that get picked up, that if you look at the hard math, it makes no sense. The video didn't get much views, didn't get much watch time, didn't get much click-through rate, and yet it blew up. Why? Who knows? The algorithm decided that this video has a chance, but it's funny because it's, in a sense, it's a self-defining prophecy. The algorithm picks up a video, so it gets big. So people say, oh, it must be because the algorithm liked it, so the person did something right. But at the end of the day, no, it's just that whatever video the algorithm picks, it will grow. I remember I have a video on my channel where I eat steak. Like, it's a 20-second video where I film a poorly cooked steak, and I say, this is me eating steak. The video has 5,000 views, and it was back in the days where my videos got 50 views. Why did this video get picked up? Who knows? But it got picked up. And for anyone who has the luck, who gets picked up, you are now in a very positive momentum, and you can build a channel off of that. I know people who built a 100K subs channel off of one video that did well.
Yeah, I have an old video from a former channel, like just like my personal channel, and it's like my very Italian grandmother reacting to like a fake tattoo. This thing's got more views than like anything on my actual fitness channel. It's pretty funny. But yeah. So you ran into recent issues right about a month ago. That's actually, I think, when more people even mentioned you got to get this guy on. you basically everything you worked for with the fitness stuff was deleted, right? So there you have a long video on it. We can link that below, but maybe give the too long didn't read version of it.
Yeah. So first off, I'm the type of guy that if I do something that I think is legitimate and I follow the rules and I get blocked, it doesn't make me want to back down. I just want to do it again because in my opinion, I'm being censored and I cannot stand censorship, which is paradoxical on YouTube because censorship is everywhere. But what I did is I made a video about pornography. I'm personally staunchly opposed to pornography because I believe that it's toxic and poisonous for both genders. And what triggered the video is that I came across a cartoon that I used to watch as a kid that was extremely sexualized. And I, back in the days, would watch it on YouTube. And so when I came across it again, I thought, man, this is not normal. Kids still have access to this thing. It's not appropriate. So what I did is I just downloaded the video off of YouTube. I re-uploaded it with my voice over it, explaining to people, explaining to young men why they had to be very careful with sexualized media, what it did to their brains, etc., etc. The fact that it was going to lead to resentment towards women. And that was perfectly, again, according to the rules. That video got age restricted, which makes no sense because the show is on YouTube with no age restriction. So I didn't like that, and I doubled down. I reposted the video with a slight filter to actually mess with our algorithm and our bots, and this video didn't get restricted. So I was like, okay, fine. And then I think it was 20 hours later, I was happily typing away on my computer, writing a script, and a window popped up telling me, your channel has been permanently deleted. You have been posting pornography. We have decided that you do not have a place on YouTube. We have also deleted your Google account, so you cannot hope to actually reinstate your YouTube. It's over. And this was a message written by a human where I was told straight up, don't even try. It's done. You have lost your channel. We don't want you on this platform anymore. So of course, when that happens to you and it's thousands of hours of work that just go down the drain, it's quite the shocking occurrence. After that, I woke up a little bit distraught, to be honest with you, with, again, the loss of contact with my community because I couldn't even talk to people. They banned my Google account, which meant I couldn't create a new one. So I couldn't even create a YouTube account to talk to people on YouTube. But thankfully, Geoff, who is always on the ball, immediately picked it up. And he immediately made an Instagram post, he tweeted at YouTube, and he got the ball rolling, and he got people's attention. So then when I made an Instagram post, it got a ton of traction, and people rallied. And as you said, me, Geoff, Alpha Destiny, we might not have the biggest communities, but the quality of the members and their implication and their loyalty is unmatched, meaning that there were waves of people tuning at YouTube, thousands of people who sent faxes to YouTube, telling them, hey, why are you doing this? Is not normal. And this got their attention, which as someone with 30K subs shouldn't be possible because I have a very small channel. Usually channels like me, YouTube just ignore altogether because they get to. This time, people like Jeff Nippard, people like Alpha Destiny again, gave me their support. They told me, hey, what happened to you is not normal. We're going to help you. So they helped me get visibility on Twitter. I got in contact with YouTube, who, of course, once they were facing the fact that I did nothing wrong, had to reinstate the channel. Now, I say had as if it was an obligation. The only reason it happened, and I told my subs that, is because people made noise. YouTube was faced now with a situation where they couldn't ignore me anymore because too many people were making noise around the entire issue. And so in 24 hours, the channel was reinstated.
Yeah, that's wild. But yeah, I did see your whole breakdown of it. And I mean, I can't even imagine, like, especially if it's something, like my channel is not this huge channel, but even for me, it would really be heartbreaking after, making so many connections. And like you said, hundreds, if not thousands of hours. I mean, that would be very upsetting to have lost all of that. And so even more so for you. And I've seen that we see this on Instagram a lot more so than YouTube. Thankfully, I mean, your situation, as you mentioned, was pretty rare. You do see channels get deleted, but usually there's strikes. They can get it back most of the time. Even somebody as inflammatory as Beacon Gains still has a platform. But on Instagram, we do see some people who were just completely deleted forever. And man, if this is your career, I mean, that is like shockingly just abrasive, to somebody's life.
Yeah, and unfair. I know a lot of people like to navigate around the idea of free speech, saying that, oh, they're private companies, so they do what they want. Well, technically that's correct, but even private companies have guidelines, meaning that technically, if you respect their guidelines, you're within the realm of what they consider free speech, so you should be protected. But the issue is that for Instagram, for example, most of the time you get deleted with no reason and you cannot appeal it. It's exactly what happened to me, where I didn't even get striked. My channel never got a strike. It just got deleted out of the blue. And that's a big issue. It's something that, of course, I'm sure is going to be of a great concern to a lot of YouTubers, because this means that there is a system that is supposed to protect you from unlawful termination, but YouTube gets to just ignore it if they so choose.
Yeah, it is really just kind of crazy. So I also want to get into some people. I mean, obviously, you're all about natural hypertrophy, right? And all about muscle gains and not so much anything with like powerlifting. So for people who again don't know, can we get just like general stats, like height, weight, maybe some of your best lifts?
Okay, sure. So height, I'm 6 feet. Weight, I'm 210. I've been 210 for a very long time because I've been recomping for a very long time. I used to be quite fat at 210, and now I'm much leaner at 210. And I want to continue on that path. Best lifts, really nothing crazy. At my body weight now, my best lifts are 250 bench. I can pull 5 plates on the deadlift. I can squat 4 plates. Some of the most, I guess, unorthodox lift I do is front squats. I walk with 3 plates on the front squats. I curl a plate and a few change, like small plates here and there on the curl bar. I can cheat curl 100 pounds, and a lot of people don't think that's legitimate, but I always find it cool. Yeah, my lifts are, I would say, mediocre to really weak. For example, my overhead press, I press 1 plate, only 135. And I know a lot of people, when they see that, they think, okay, you're 210, you have relatively big shoulders. How is that possible? Well, I've always been weak at the press, and it's also not something that I care about much. So I do it once a week, if that. So that's most of my lifts. Back when I was much fatter, I had better lifts. So back then I could press 3 plates. But I quickly found out when I lost the fat that that wasn't due to muscles, it was due to better leverages.
When you say like 250 bench, is that your max or that's what you work with?
It's what I work with.
Okay. So okay, that's a big difference then. Yeah, because I think yeah, if you told me you were 210 and your max was 250, that would be kind of shocking. But yeah, if you're doing it, what, like I said, of like 8 to 10 for these lifts roughly?
That's even a little bit high. I usually do 4 to 6.
4 to 6. Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like with Jeffrey, his strength compared to his size is relatively low. Now, both of you guys are big guys, so it's not like you're actually weak, but one might expect more given your size for sure.
Yeah, pound for pound, if we look at like weight classes in powerlifting, we are weak because those lifts won't. It's not even that you won't place; it's that you'd be lucky to score last,
right?
If they even give you that last place, because I think it's something that people need to accept, right? If you train for size, strength is going to be important for progression in terms of muscle growth, but in terms of absolute numbers and being able to call yourself strong, yeah, we're stronger than the average population, but that's very easy. If we compare ourselves to people who actually train for strength, we're really weak.
Yeah, it is. It's always been an interesting thing, and I've always been kind of the opposite. I'm not on everything, but I'm probably stronger than I look. Like, even when I was in the 170s, I was deadlifting 500 plus. Bench probably not like dramatically different than you. I mean, my best was 225 for, I think it was 16 or 17, and I was probably about 190 when I did it. So like relatively pretty strong, but certainly, still wouldn't like win powerlifting competitions or anything like that. Like not like really legit ones. So you obviously, I was just curious, I've heard some people talk about your stance on using gear as either unethical. Obviously, you're against it generally. Is it more of an ethical issue for you? Is it because of the health risks? Like, what is your general stance there?
So to me, whether you discuss ethics or morality, it all stems from something practical. Meaning that every time I have a very hard stance on something, if I present it as a principle, it's because at some point I decided that logically it's not good for life. And for me, health is number one, meaning that I don't see the point in following a practice like bodybuilding, for example, if it's going to sabotage your health, because it should be the reason why you do it in the first place, to be able to actually have muscle mass in your old age, to be able to be nimble and mobile, and also to be happy in your body. I started because of that. I didn't want to be stronger or bigger. I wanted to be happy. And building a bigger body was what made me happy. I couldn't see myself relying on a substance that is going to potentially toxically impact me in the future to get that happiness, because it's the snake that bites its own tail, because now my happiness is going to rely entirely on drug. So that's the conclusion I came to, and that I wanted to share with people, because I know that it took me a long time to get there. Many people know that drugs are bad, but they don't really know why. They'll be told, oh, it's dangerous. But the issue with PEDs is that it's not dangerous at first. At first, the only thing you're going to see is you're going to see the massive benefits of size, of improved mood, etc. The negatives come afterwards. They come when you're already hooked on the positives. So it's already too late. It's at the point where you're going to be able to put your hand in the sand and pretend that you don't see them. Like many PED users who are dealing with massive side effects, but ignore them because they love the benefits too much. To me, that's the point. Natural bodybuilding and natural training in general needs to focus on that. It needs to focus on the ability of telling people, hey, even though you've been told that PED use is an alternative, I can show you for a fact, logically, that it's not, and that if you stay natural, you're going to be so much better. And that's something that I do, Jove does, Alpha Destiny does, Bold Omni-Man does. Anyone in this natural lifting community, right? We tried to show another path. We try to offer another chance for people to see that, yes, you can stay natural, you can be big, and all of that is going to align at the end of the day: health, morality, ethicality, etc.
Yeah, I think for me, it's more of a, like, I generally tell people I think you should not use gear for a lot of the reasons that you said. I think a lot of times it's an emotional decision. I can understand why, a movie actor for a certain role, or, somebody who's trying to be a professional in a certain sport, certainly like bodybuilding, the sport of bodybuilding, then I could understand it. And, if you just decide that the health consequences aren't significant enough for you, I just think most people aren't really that informed about it, and so they make an emotional decision because their friends are doing it, or they see something on social media. I think that the actual number of people who quote unquote should, or could justify using it, is a very, very small proportion of the people who are actually using it.
Which is the vast majority of people who do it. Because if you look at numbers, if we could run stats, I would guarantee you that most people who start taking drugs are teenagers or young adults, meaning people who don't take good decisions altogether. But it's incredible to see that these same people who are being restricted from taking, again, any life-altering decisions for the most part, are also the ones that are being targeted the most by PD users, because they're the demographic that is the most susceptible to falling for that. If you look at the following of big PD users, of those guys who are just massive of the drugs, they prey off of children. It's a reality, because a normal adult with a well-built mind will not fall for that. An actual lifter will not fall for that type of practice, which is why it's also so dangerous, and it needs to be prevented at all costs, is because if you take a decision that is going to impact your life forever when you're 17, you didn't even give yourself a chance. As you said, it's purely emotional, and you're so easily influenceable at that age. Look at the amount of teens that smoke cigarettes. Why do they smoke? Well, because their friends smoke, they want to be cool like their friends. It's as simple as that. But that decision down the line can have massive consequences at a point where they'll be smart enough to realize it was a mistake.
Yeah, for sure. How do you feel then about, because some people will say, you have all these natty or not, these call out videos and things, and they'll say, hey, who cares who is on gear? And I don't know if you ever back on the forums back in the days, but when I was first getting into it, I was heavily on the forums. And to me, I don't necessarily think people should like individually be called out. I mean, maybe, but I think it is important to kind of know what's generally possible on gear versus not. And again, obviously genetics are a huge factor, and just because somebody else did it naturally doesn't mean that you can do it naturally, etc. But I and many other people, when getting into lifting, are influenced by these people who are heavily enhanced and genuinely don't even realize it. Like, don't just think that like that's what the goal is. Like if I think of what my goal was when getting started, it's literally like 30 pounds more muscle than I have now, because I just didn't know. And so I don't know, you touched a lot about like the influence. Do you think that's a big issue for younger individuals, and do you think those people should be called out regarding their enhancement?
Well, I think that you touched on something interesting, is that a lot of the time, those big PD users that have those massive communities, they're not malevolent. I think that it's miscasting them to think that they're doing that on purpose. I think that most of that is through projection, meaning that they don't even really realize what they're doing. They're trying to justify their way of life and make money out of it. So what they do is they just push their own ideology onto people. But the problem is that their ideology led them to massive drug use. So it has a chance to influence people as well. And this is why when the natty or nots come into play, right? Now, I personally think that natty or nots, at least in the format that they espouse to their YouTube Fitness, are 100% negative, meaning that they don't do what they're supposed to do. You're being told, oh, I'm going to tell you guys whether this guy is natural or not so as to not mess your expectations so that you can have realistic standards. That to me is just, it's a pure fabrication. The people who make natty or nots don't care about that. They've never cared about helping the community. And the best way to see that is the fact that most people who make natty or nots are enhanced. So why exactly are they doing that, right? You're on PED, pointing out the finger saying that guy is on PED. How does that compute? Well, it computes because natty or nots get a ton of views. As you stated previously, you can build a channel off of natty or nots. That's what Greg said did. So they'll just do it. It's just the appeal of numbers. It was never to help people. But the problem is that natty or nots are really fun. It's something you can't take away from that. You're going to be going through some sort of detective work about, is that guy that you've been watching for years on drug or not? And maybe the guy who makes the video even has good arguments and good points to bring up. But at the end of the video, what did it do for you? It either shattered your trust in someone, or it made you think that everyone is on drugs. And this leads back to what you said about the fact that some people now say, hey, who cares? Who are these people? These people are the ones that were brought up by natty or nots. They've seen it too many times and it fried their brains. Now they think, well, this guy was apparently natty, but he's not. And this guy could be natty, we don't know. So at the end of the day, why even bother? Why even ask ourselves the question? Well, we ask ourselves the question because people who are not natural, the fake natties, give again unrealistic standards. They push terrible training methods, and for the most part, they do it for money's sake. That is what should have been focused on. But as I said, that's not what people who make natty or nots focus on.
So, and I agree with that as far as the people who tend to make them. It's funny. I don't know if I've ever thought about how most of them are enhanced, but you're right. Like almost all of those channels are people who are enhanced. But do you think that it's helpful to get information out there? Meaning, do you think it's relevant for Gen Pop to know if somebody is enhanced or not? Because maybe people aren't trying to be deceptive about it, but I can think of some pretty clear examples where they are pushing products knowing that they are enhanced, but talking about how you're going to get, I mean, again, T Nation is like the constant example of this, right? Like Christian Thibodeau and guys like that who are on there and clearly pushing products, talking about how amazing the progress is going to be while knowingly being enhanced, but not acknowledging that.
That should be what natty or nots accomplish. It should show people that, yes, all of that supplement industry nonsense that's been going on has been upheld by PED users, that without PED users, you would never buy these products because you would never think, oh, I can look like that guy. So it's allowing people to know what's possible naturally. My issue with that is always the same, is that if you want to take the standard down to a normal level, chances are you won't stop at the normal level. You'll go lower. And this is when you have people who tell you, oh, a 3-plate bench is impossible naturally, or a 6-pack is not possible if you're big. You have to be very skinny, or you can't be a certain weight. I know people who tell me that you cannot be 6 feet and 210, that you would need to be really fat. Why? Because their standards are way low. But the problem is that because their standards are so low, when they themselves try to attain anything, they'll stay there. And now anyone who's bigger than them is going to be considered to be on steroids because of all of the natty or nots. And this is when you fall into the trap of the natural pride of people who tell you, well, at least I'm natural. Well, yeah, you're natural, but you're also small. There is no pride in that. Everyone is born natural. You have to make something out of the body you were given. So that's my issue. And as for the product pushing, I get what you're saying. It's correct. But keep in mind also that all of these guys who make natty or nots also push products. The entire industry pushes products. So if one scam artist points out the finger at another scam artist, why am I supposed to start liking the first one? Because it's a trap that many people fall into, where they fall in love with their hero that told them, hey, this guy is not natural, don't trust them. They start to trust them unconditionally and they get scammed altogether. For me, that's the big issue too. If I can make a video, an idea or not, about a guy, and I shatter your perception, for me, it means that you are fanboying for that guy, that you are blindly following whatever they say, and that your critical thinking skills were just in the gutters. That's the issue. That's what needs to be combated.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with any of that. And I think kind of what I touched on before. I mean, the reality is, I do think obviously steroids highly skew the perceptions of what's realistic for many people, but so does genetic variability, right? I mean, the reality is that is going to be widely different among different people. And just because, maybe you could be, 6 feet 210, maybe somebody else could be 6 feet 220, and somebody else is only going to ever be up like 190, which you're not going to know, obviously, until you've been doing this for a very long time and putting everything into it. So, I mean, it's very hard to say this, but if you had to kind of rank your genetics for muscle growth specifically, 50th percentile, 70th percentile, if you had to guess?
Well, first off, I want to come back on something you just said, valuability. I think it's an important point, because if you look at the difference in potential, for example, hormonal profile between two natural lifters, someone who's top production and someone who's very low in terms of potential in genetics, and you compare that with drug users, you'll find out that the variability between two naturals is minuscule. It's almost nothing. It's going to be a few grams here and there. So it doesn't make that much of a difference. And I think it's something important to point out, because PD users are on grams and grams of stuff. They take doses that are 3 times, 4 times what a natural is going to produce. So they are in their own entire universe. And I think it's dangerous to look at what PD users have done to our standards and then equate that to genetics as if it was the same thing. Because genetics play a role, yes, but to me, it's minimal. And this leads me to answer your question. I don't consider myself to be someone with good genetics. When I see the amount of time I had to put in and the way I evolved, where I just gained a few pounds here and there throughout the years from 110 to 210, I personally cannot look at someone else and think, yeah, you can't do that. It's not possible. Because for me, anyone who trains 13 years is going to have a physique as good, if not better than mine. So it's a situation where I would tell you that I think I have personally below average genetics, but that if you looked at me now, you would think I have very good genetics because I actually worked my ass off. And that's what I call Schrodinger's genetics. It's impossible to decide or to detect your level of genetics before you've put in enough work. And by that time, you'll be big. So technically, you'll have good genetics, which means that the vast majority of people willing to put in the work have good genetics.
So I'm sure this will lead to a good discussion, because that's definitely a point we disagree on. So I'll touch on both of those points. So as far as the steroids versus genetics, this is something I was talking with Abel Chabai and Brandon DeCruz on like probably a year ago now. We said, okay, so you could basically take as much steroids as you wanted, but there's somehow no health side effects. Like it's just the benefits. Or, and like you have like dead average genetics. Or you can have like pristine top of the top level genetics, but be natural. And all of us agreed genetics by a long shot. When you look at guys like a Doug Miller and a Lane Norton who compete closer to 200 pounds completely shredded, and then you look at a guy like Brad Loomis, who's been training with top people, I mean, top coaches for 25 years, and he competes at similar height at 155. You're talking a 40-pound difference in lean body mass on stage. We have many examples. Now, again, can you ever know somebody is completely natural? No. But we have people who have passed test after test after test who are extremely impressive, and people who I know and many people know who have used gear who really don't look that good. And if you do not have the genetics to respond to gear, so we can talk about how amazing gear is. Well, Ronnie Coleman, who's probably 100 pounds bigger than any natural could be, but he had the genetic response to gear. There are many people who go on gear who look like absolute trash, to be blunt, and they do not have the response. To touch on the hormone variability, sure, most natural lifters are going to have somewhere between 300 and 900 nanograms per deciliter of testosterone, but testosterone is one of many, many factors that relate to one's genetic potential, and in no way would make up the difference that we see in terms of muscle fibers, in terms of androgen receptor density, in terms of myostatin, mTOR activation. I mean, there's so many things that lead to genetics. So that might just be a point we disagree on, but I think genetic variability is quite huge, as it is with many other human variables.
So for the first point, I don't know the second person you cited. You tell me that they're 6 feet and 150. They compete in bodybuilding.
Brad Loomis is not 6 foot; he's 5'9",
Okay.
and he competes at about 155. And then there are other, like the top naturals, 5'9". You could be. I mean, there are guys who are competing at like 190. So you're talking a 35-pound difference in lean body mass.
And we're talking about someone who's natural.
Correct.
All right. So I would say here that it might also be a personal choice. It might not necessarily be that he can't gain any more weight. He might just want to stay at that level to be shredded to the socks. It's possible. Now, it leads to a completely different set of interrogations as whether or not a natural should actually want to be shredded. In my opinion, if you follow the standards of pro bodybuilding and you're natural, you're shooting yourself in the foot because you might be leaving a ton of mass on the table. If I wanted to be lean, I might have to be 170. That's 40 pounds of mass. Do I want to lose that 40 pounds of mass just to be slightly more lean? I think it's a waste in a sense, because you're just going to be small then. But that's a different discussion. But to go back on the genetics, I do agree with something that you said, is that one, you have to look at other factors than just hormonal profile. I use the hormonal profile because when people talk about PEDs, it's all they look at, because PDUs only does that. It only has an influence on your hormonal profile. So that was for the people who are obsessed with tests and who always say, well, I have poor test production. Okay, but don't correlate that with PDUs. PDUs would like quadruple your test level. So the difference between you and a top natural is not as big as you would think. And then it's the rest, right? We all know the tale of the guy who took drugs and he looks like garbage. Why? Well, because your hormonal profile is only one thing. After that, it has an influence on the way you look, on the insertion of the muscle, the quality of the fibers, as you said, etc. That cannot change just via PEDUs. But I would say that if you take the same individual and you clone them and you put one on PED and the other on nothing, just natural, the one on PED is of course going to blow up and is of course going to make better results. It's not something that you can argue with. And this leads to the problem with genetics, in my opinion, is that the field of genetics hinges on the idea that you're going to compare yourself with others. But this is already a problem in itself, because what is the point? You're training for yourself by yourself. You don't need to compare yourself. So you are you, and you have the genetics you are gifted. That's what you have to work with. Even if someone is much better than you, it doesn't matter. Now it's the question of whether or not the PEDUs in this individual would make the difference. And as we already said, yes, it would. So I agree that there are people who are going to have better genetics altogether. But if we look again at your example of, do you want pristine genetics and natural, or do you want normal genetics and PDUs as much as you want with no consequences? The issue is that you're looking at two different people. They're not the same guy, and that's my issue.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, obviously, it's just a theoretical argument. You could never really have that scenario. But when I've seen people who, as far as one could know somebody is natural, I mean, it's not even just a muscle growth thing. I mean, levels of strength, the ability at sport, there's such a huge variation. I mean, obviously height, right? I mean, you obviously, it's not as modifiable as muscle growth, but I personally think there's a wide array of differences when it comes to genetics. And like I said, I can think of even like a couple of friends who I know took gear, and there's like one guy in our group who's just like a natural athlete. I mean, just like, he was top level baseball player, squatted 4 or 5 for 6 at like 20 years old. Some people could just never achieve that, right? I mean, depending on if they're like really bottom of the barrel genetics. So, but to your point, you're never going to know these things unless you try it. One point I guess I would bring up when you said you're comparing yourself to other people and why that could matter. I think, and I can tell you this myself, from the first 5 years, I mean, from day one, I was very dedicated to this. I mean, I can think of maybe twice in 18 years that I've actually skipped the workout, like not a planned, but just like, I'm not going to go today. It just doesn't happen. And when I was in high school, I really didn't have the results that I would have expected, compared to what I was seeing. And there was a a large part of that made me feel like I'm doing something wrong. And because of that, I became even more obsessed. I would lose social interactions. I was so dead. I didn't have a car, so I'd have to get up at 5 a.m. to go to the gym with my dad. And it actually became a net negative for my life, the more obsessed I got with it. And I think if I had known back then, hey, you're not doing anything wrong. If anything, you can become a little less obsessed and enjoy life. And not, again, not to not try, but you could just kind of back off a little bit and enjoy life. That would have been helpful. In the same way that, like, people can debate this, but there's a lot of research to show that IQ is very genetic, right? I mean, it's highly heritable. And so to tell somebody, let's say somebody's really trying, but they're just not doing that well in school, and to say, no, this is all based on how hard you study. You're not trying enough. And clearly, if this person's getting an A, but you're just consistently getting B minuses, you're doing something wrong. Maybe that's not the best approach, right? Maybe that blame isn't the best approach on them. And I would say the same thing could be said for sports performance or bodybuilding progression.
Yeah, it's important to again put fate or the equation of genetics back into the question. I'm not one who's going to tell you that genetics don't exist. I'm not that naive. I've been in gyms. I've met people who are monsters right off the bat. I have stories on my channel of people who, like, I used to live with a guy, one of my roommate, who didn't watch what he ate. He trained twice a week for 45 minutes. He only trained in summer because he hated the cold, and he had a better physique than I had. Because he was just a genetic beast. But the thing with that guy is that because he trained so scarcely, years after years after years, I managed to catch up to him, and now I have a better physique. If that guy trained like I train with my diet, he would be the type of person that you see and think, oh yeah, that's PEDs. There's no way around it. But he's natural 100%. That's genetics. You can fight that. I used to know a guy who, and I'm still in contact with him. I'm trying to boost him because I know he can be a world record holder one day. That guy showed up to the gym, benched, like, I think every 3 days, and within like 3 months, he had a 350 bench. He weighted 170, 180. The first time this guy deadlifted, I was deadlifting myself. I was warming up. There was 365 on the bar. First time he deadlifted, he walked up to the bar, did a set of 12 with no difficulty, with 365 on the bar. You cannot teach that. That guy nowadays is squatting 600 pounds. He's in his second or third years of training. That's a prodigy. That's a genius. But the issue is that these are like this much. They are the tiny parts. These are the ones who are going to make it big in the sport regardless of what they do. But I'm not like that. You're not like that. So we have to live with that reality and get the best of what we can get and not obsess, as you said. I'm sure that many young men have very high goals for themselves, and that's excellent, but they get upset when they can't get it. I think it's not really a question of standard, it's a question of deadlines. You expected to be at a certain level at 17 and you didn't have it. But maybe nowadays you are at this level. It just required more time. I'm the same way, meaning that I trained for years and years and the results were very small. But the difference is that because for me, I was living in my bubble, I was doing it just by myself. I didn't have anyone to compare myself with. So whatever modification I saw on the scale on my body was something that I would take. I started to experiment what you described, which is a form of body dysmorphia, when I started consuming social media, YouTube, etc., because comparison is the thief of joy. You stop being centered on yourself, you start looking at others constantly, and that can be really painful psychologically.
Yeah, and I think we all have our own biases based on, like, we all have our own reason for being in this space, right? And hopefully for most people, it's a benevolent reason. But for you've kind of had this journey, and I think it's good because you're right. I mean, most of us are going to fall in that middle of the bell curve, or at least close to it, maybe a standard deviation. And I think one of the things I try to get out to people was, because of my early experiences, is that you need to develop a love for it. You can't do it just for the progress itself long term. You need to make it a part of your lifestyle, but also, and it's important to know the audience too. I was so obsessed that I think I do talk a lot about, like, hey, don't become too all encompassed by it. But for most people, if I was given a seminar at Planet Fitness, that's not what I'd be saying,
Exactly.
right? I'd say, look, you guys need to put a lot more effort into it. So the audience is important, and our own personal biases, of course, color it quite a bit.
Yeah, and that's a very important point to bring up. It's the question of perspective. If I were to relate that to something like philosophy, for example, if you're interested in Stoicism, Stoicism hinges on the idea that you have to temper your emotions. And one emotion that is especially tempered is anger. Why? Because the Greeks back in the days were very prompt to anger. They were very fiery people. Unlike what many people think, they were not sages, they were warriors. They were always described as being a little bit crazy. So the philosophies applied to their people had to insist on that. But nowadays, if you look at Stoicism applied to us in general, I think we don't need that anymore. We need more fire because we're too cold. So this is, again, a question of perspective. When we make videos for people, our bias comes into play. We're going to tell people how to live their life, or we're going to give advice according to what worked for us. That's okay. It's our subjectivity. We can't do away with that. And as you pointed out previously, there are people who got really popular on YouTube because of that, because they have a certain subjectivity or sensitivity that people like. They vibe with it. We can't take that away. It's the reason why people like us so much. If we were just robots, objective robots, no one would want to watch us because it would just be boring. So I think that as long as we know it, and we engage in open talks like this, and we agree on things like, for example, saying, yeah, it's my opinion, it's from where I came from, so you better be able to adapt it to your life, then we're fine.
Do you have a philosophical background through education or just personal interest?
Both.
Both. Okay. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me, but you can kind of tell like who's read what, at least to some degree. So, I saw a video you made on Deloads, and by the way, I love the thumbnails with Dragon Ball Z because I'm not like a huge anime person. I have a friend who keeps trying to get me to watch other anime, and like I was a diehard Dragon Ball Z fan. I finally gave in and watched Dragon Ball Super. It was yeah. It was hard to get through. I had to get the exposure. But yeah, like original Frieza Saga, Cell Saga, all that, love it. And in this video, you talked about how you have worked out. I think it was like, I don't know exactly how many days a week, but basically it sounded like you were working out a lot for a long time, and you felt like a lot of naturals can do that. So maybe go into a little bit on your training and what you feel has been a big part of your success getting to where you are.
All right. So first off, I will give you some anime recommendations because there is things out there much better than Dragon Ball Z. And I'm sure that you are going to be rejoiced to discover them at some point, but that's for later. As for my training, if we're going to start talking about deloads, for example, I never did deloads the way most people do it, which is a week off here and there, right? That's what's prescribed by a lot of people. I never did that because I've always trained nonstop, meaning that my mode of training was always, I want to train as often as possible. So frequency was always important, and taking a week off made no sense in my opinion. And I made progress off of that. I never plateaued. I never got injured. I know that some people get sick because their immune system gets shut down. It never happened to me. And as I say in the video, I'm not some mythical creature or beast. I started like everyone else with low work capacity, soreness for a week after a workout. So I was a normal human. But I built up my work capacity by refusing to embrace things such as deload and always keeping the workload very, very high, which led me to a point where now I train 6 days a week, 2 to 3 hours every single day. And my only break of the week is the Sunday, and then I'm right back into it. How is that possible? Well, it's simple. My entire program hinges on the idea that I can't take more breaks than that. So the split I do is an upper lower, which allows me to, again, not work the same muscles too many times in a row. The rotations of lifts in the program make it so that I'm not going to hit the same muscle group very hard within a 48-hour window. Everything hinges on the idea, again, that minimum rest is going to be optimal, because rest is not just doing nothing. If you squat on Monday and you squat again, or you do knee flexion on Thursday, even if you trained in the middle, as long as you didn't train your quads, that's rest. You still rested. And I know that many people say, well, what about the CNS? We are not made of like cardboard. Your CNS is not something so weak that is going to be depleted like this. People used to work in the fields for 12 hours. People do manual labor in the sun for 8 hours in August where I live. Their CNS is just fine. They still train afterwards. If you manage your CNS as if it were just a finite resource that is going to just lead to you being fried, most of the time it's going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy, and you're constantly going to be tired or overexhausted. It's because you didn't train one of the most important capacity that you have, and it's your work capacity. And if you want to be able to accumulate volume and be frequently in the gym, that's something you need to train. Too many people ignore it, and they train 3 times a week for years at a time. And I look at that and think, okay, you never upped your frequency, so you left gains on the table.
So there's a lot of talk now about not just frequency, but volume. If you're working out 2 to 3, you said 2 to 3 hours, is that right?
Yeah.
For workout? And you're doing that per muscle group, really 3 times a week, right? 3 upper and 3 lower. So do you know how many work sets you're getting per week per muscle group?
It's always going to be contained between 12 and 18, something like this. And even for some of them, I have some muscle groups that are going to be above that, and some that are going to be below that. For example, quads, knee flexions, 6 to 10 max. Sometimes it's just even like 4 or 5.
Yeah. So that's a pretty reasonable amount of volume, in my opinion. Like 12 to 18, I don't personally see much benefit going above that. I've had periods as low as like 6 to 10, and I thought it was still fine. And even, I mean, especially when dieting, I don't know if you change yours when dieting, but I found like to maintain it's 10, 8 has even been fine. So I'm surprised though, because I would think, like, for me, I was able to do that with 3 or 4 workouts a week, about 90 minutes. So to hear 6 days a week at 2 to 3 hours, I was expecting a really high number. Are you resting a really long time between sets?
Well, no, because one, I don't really rest. I do supersets for everything. The only moment where I rest is for my strength work. Where this would make more sense for you is if I told you that on a usual upper day, I'm going to train chest, I'm going to train triceps, long out of the triceps, shoulders, forearms, abs, upper back. So if you look at all of these muscles, and now you apply 3 to 4 sets for each muscle, and maybe even more for some, now you understand why it might be so long. But I also want to make people know that this also means that I don't go balls to the wall. I don't go to absolute failure. I don't trash the muscle. I work them, I stimulate it plentifully with the work that I do, but because I know I'm going to train it again, maybe in 48 hours, I can't go too hard. And it's also the reason why I don't accumulate quite as much fatigue as most people would. So it goes down to baseline much faster, and I can train it again. For me, that's the reason why I don't like deloads. I want my fatigue to always be high because I always want that movement to be occurring. I never want the tank to be empty.
So would you say, if you get into the whole RAR thing, on average, I mean, would you say that you're doing like straight sets where maybe your first set is a 3 RAR and by the end it's 0, or are you adjusting the weight per, set so that it's always staying at, let's say, 1 RAR?
So I never adjust the weight for my top sets, for my hard sets. I use what is called evolving rep ranges. So what is going to temper down is the amount of reps I did. So for example, if I put 365 on the bar for squats and I do 8 reps, the next set is going to be 6, and then it's going to be 4. So I accommodate the muscle like this, where I know that the muscle is tired. I don't want to change the weight. I want to keep the intensity as high as possible. So I'm just going to reduce the volume. And it's a method that I find is quite potent if you want to just focus on muscle building. After that, reps in reserve. I love reps in reserve. I never go to what people call failure. Most people, when they say failure, it means technical failure, meaning that their form goes to garbage. They do 8 reps of squat. The first 6 are good. Then 7 and 8, it's a good morning. These 2 reps, I don't want. I cut them off. Too high injury risk. And even if you look at tonnage and the quality of the volume you get for these, your form is all out of whack. So you're not getting the type of tonnage that you want. Cutting these make a ton of sense. So for me, for certain lifts, like curls, for example, I never do reps in reserve, or for bench, but a lot of the time I will leave myself a 1 to 2 rep, just a tampon that I can just push away, because I know that at the end of the day, it's fatigue that I can make up somewhere else with less risks.
Okay. So you would say you cut it at technical failure? Is that about right? Like before it would fail?
Yeah.
Or it would have bad form? Like you could get it up, but it's not going to look pretty.
Yeah. If we look at the reps, here is absolute failure, where you like fell. Like you fall with the bar on your back because you couldn't get it. That's never do that. To me, it's you never want to fail lift. Then there's that period here, that zone here, where it's technical failure. And then there's that zone here where it's hard. It's the slow rep. You grind it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't take away. I keep that. But the second we get into the technical failure, I cut it.
Gotcha. Yeah. I think that's a good place for most people realistically to stop. So what do you do when you're with 6 days a week? Like something that I've found a little annoying recently, because most of my training has been 4 days per week, like on average throughout my lifting career. And I've done as much as double sessions. I mean, I've tried everything after so much time, but that's kind of where I gravitate as for. With 6 days a week, I don't know how social you are or if you go on vacations or anything. Do you have to modify it if you're away for a weekend, or do you just find a gym wherever you are? How does that affect your lifestyle?
All right. I'm sure we've all heard the trifecta of social life, work life, and gym. Pick two.
Yeah.
Right? You've heard that. Well,
Yeah.
I picked two. I do gym and I do work. I don't have a social life. I'm going to be straight up honest. I know a lot of people would want to dance around the issue because it's seen as, in a sense, a little bit mediocre or pathetic in a sense, but I don't see my friends, right? I think last time I saw a friend was a week ago, and it had been like 2 years since I saw that guy in particular. I'm a bit of an outlier in that, meaning that I'm not very social at all. As long as I can see my partner and my cat, that's all I need for social interactions. I know that many people are not like that, so it's not going to be as easy to be as extreme as I am. But for me, it's what makes it so easy as well to just focus on the gym, is because I don't have any other thing to worry about at all.
Interesting.
And then what was your second question? I forgot.
Well, it was all kind of tying into the same thing, just if it affects your social life or if you go away or like if you travel. Let's say
and for the travel thing, yeah. So I used to be the type that I would refuse to travel and take holidays because I didn't want to miss out on gym time. And the issue is that this is a very unflexible mindset. And it's nice to be rigid and to have principles and to have a schedule. But if it's absolute to the point that you yourself cannot even modify it if you want, then it becomes a problem. And I've started to change with the years. Well, now I can take a week off and think, okay, I'll just find the gym on the spot and go once or twice just to maintain gains. Or last time I went to Miami, I grabbed a pair of rings. There was a tree where I lived. I just put the rings on the tree and I did just upper body workouts. Then I found the gym and I did squats and deadlifts like once a week. And that was it. It's not like you're going to shrink, right? I think it's important for people to realize that muscle build naturally doesn't go away. It doesn't just dissipate. You cannot train for 2-3 weeks with minimal efforts and it's still going to be there when you come back.
That's a great point to bring up regarding the deload, because as I watched your video, one thing I thought to myself was, I don't think, especially like consistent implemented deloads are that helpful. However, I also don't think the occasional time off is really going to hurt anything. And I'm glad to see that you're on the same page there.
Oh, no, absolutely. I think it's a point I made in the video. I want people to know that if you're going to not do deloads, don't do it because you think, oh, if I stop moving for a second, my muscles are going to atrophy. It's not true. It's the same for diet. If you miss a meal here and there, it's not going to make you just disappear into thin air. The issue, however, is that you're breaking a momentum and it's small incremental gains you're not making. So it's where the problem is. If you skip a week every 6 weeks, yeah, you won't lose much strength or size at all, but you lose progress and you lose accumulation in long term in terms of tonnage, not strength. In terms of weights that you're going to lift, that is going to stimulate the muscle. And if you actually tally all of that at the end of the year, like you would tally, for example, all of the time you missed a meal, it might be just 300 calories, but at the end of the year, it's 30K calories. And now it's a difference.
Yeah, I would wonder if there is so that last analogy just kind of reminds me of these, ridiculous nutrition advices where they'll say like, if you were to just drop one soda and that's 120 calories, that's this many 1,000 calories over a year and you would lose this much fat. And it's like, we all know that's BS because your body's going to adapt within, once you've lost the first 2 pounds or whatever it is, your body's going to adapt. Similarly, I don't know if I would say, if somebody were to say, hey, once every quarter or once every 3 months, they take a week off, but over 10 years, that's like 40 weeks off. Like, I think there's a lot to be said for like some catch-up growth. Like we all know people who have had an injury, they had to take a long time off. They clearly lost something, but then they're back to a peak or beyond once they've gotten back to it. Like there are even studies showing, there was a study that was on, it was like either consistent training the whole time, or actually it was 6 weeks on, 2 weeks off. And I forget how long the study was run, but there was no difference. Now, who were the study participants is a big factor. There's obviously a lot of factors, but I do think that you're probably going to catch up as long as you're not ridiculous with the time off.
To go back on the injury thing you just brought up, it's something that I have knowledge of because it happened to me in the past. I used to get injured all the time, and I always came back from it, and I always made good gains afterwards. But what you have to look at is who would have made the better gains, the version of me that got injured or the version of me that never got injured. Just because the version that got injured managed to make gains afterwards doesn't mean that it's just as much as the guy who actually paid attention and didn't get injured would get. So at the end of the day, I think it's a little bit hard to argue, even though your study seems to show that it's the case, that someone who does less work is going to do better than someone who does more work. That being said, work is just fatigue accumulation. After that, what the fatigue becomes, muscle growth, strength, whatever you want to seek, is something to keep in mind, because it might very well be that the 6-week on, 2-week off crew has a program that is intelligently crafted around that, and the crew that just trains nonstop has a program that is not intelligently crafted. And in this case, smart work is going to be consistency, of course. But if you apply smart work and again, good programming to the consistency, this is when it starts making sense. That's why I told people with my Deload video as well that it works for me, because my entire program hinges on the idea that I'm not going to take a deload. I plan my program it's a formula that I used. I want to make sure I don't get it wrong. I know that my recovery is going to be as such, so I plan like this. I don't plan by letting the recovery dictate it. It's the other way around. I want to train as much as possible so as to maximize recovery. I don't want to obsess over recovery, because that tends to lead to sub-maximal practices when it comes to training.
Man, well, I don't want to take up too much of your time. We're going a little over an hour here. Thank you for the discussion. I very much enjoyed it. Would definitely love to get you back on in the future. And where can people find more of your stuff?
So for me, it's YouTube only. I really don't have any other social media. I have Instagram where I post the odd selfie here and there. But if you want to listen to what I think about bodybuilding, my training principles, natural lifting, philosophy, psychology, whatever, you can find me at Natural Hypertrophy.
To your channel, as well as that video about your time away from YouTube and all that happened there. Thanks again, man.
Thank you so much.